All right. So welcome everybody. Um, what I want to talk a little bit about today is about some final portfolio deliverables they have for the semester, and really get some good general tips for conveying presentations. So, um, where you should be with your final project is you should be completing your poster in the next week, and you should be completing your final project in your actual final project submission. Keep in mind that you did receive feedback from me on your initial draft of your proposal. I was lenient in the grading for those proposals, so if I gave you any feedback, please make sure to keep that in mind. I know a couple of folks had some issues with being really too general with some of the results, some of their focus for the work. So for those folks, please keep that in mind. Um, so, like I've mentioned a couple times, everybody needs to create a poster for this course. You will be uploading a few minute poster presentation, so a screencast of you presenting your poster. And everyone will be creating one, and there is no need to print out super fancy posters or anything like that. So for graduation, if you're doing a capstone, you will need to do a poster. And if you do plan on doing a capstone, I highly encourage you to attend the capstone presentations when you're for the folks who are graduating before you. So there's always capstone presentations at the end of the fall and spring semesters. Usually like a week or two before the end of the semester. So if you get an email about that, even if you're not one of the ones presenting, I would highly recommend you attend. So it'll give you a good idea of what poster presentations are about. So if you're doing a capstone, you will be doing a poster presentation at the conclusion of your last semester. And if you're doing a thesis, you'll have a paper in defense, and I think the thesis presentation is 25 minutes. I might be wrong on that, but it's about 25 minutes or so, give or take a few minutes. So you actually have a full defense. So you don't need to do a poster for that, but you will be doing a much more in-depth defense for your thesis. So as you get closer to thesis, that's a conversation you and your advisor will have. But just for now, keep in mind that you will be having a poster presentation for your thesis. So what I want to talk about today to wrap up the semester is technical presentations. Now, doing a technical presentation is not easy. I will tell you that I've done hundreds of technical presentations over the last probably 7 years or so, and it is not easy to do them. It takes a lot of practice, takes a lot of experience, it takes a lot of organization. And actually, what I found is that doing a technical presentation via screencast like I'm doing right now is actually the hardest type of presentation to give. It's actually very hard to present when there's no audience present. So, for those of you who are doing a thesis, you will have an audience present, and even for those folks doing capstone, you'll have an audience present for your poster. So today I just want to talk about some tips for doing a technical presentation. Now this could be for your capstone, for your thesis, or technical presentation in general. So I'll start things off with a quote, and don't speak unless you can improve silence. So this isn't an actual quote I have. I think it's an ancient proverb or something. I am not nearly smart enough to come up with a insightful quote like this. But I always find this to be an interesting statement to start off talks about technical presentations, because I think very, very too often people get too wordy. People have too much information. They have information overload for the audience. So when doing a technical presentation, sometimes less is more. So take a second and think about what makes a good presentation. Now, this could be about a technical topic. This could be a presentation on a new car that's coming out. It could be a Steve Jobs presentation on the iPhone 3 when it came out. Think about what makes a good presentation. Okay. So some of the things you may have thought about with a presentation might be how it delivers the message well, is well organized. But generally, good presentations have good content. They're well delivered and they're well designed. So it's good content. Let's think back to the iPhone video that came out, Steve Jobs video that introduced the iPhone. It had good content, meaning the slides were easy to follow. Steve was easy to follow. He delivered it well. He made you interested in the product. And it was really a well-designed presentation overall. And I'm sure Steve Jobs, as good as he was as a presenter, practiced that a ton and spent a lot of time organizing that presentation. But at the end of the day, a good presentation should be two things. It should be interesting and informative. If you create a presentation that is boring but has the greatest set of information out there, you're going to lose your audience. I've sat in on a lot of presentations at very good conferences, and usually in the first 30 seconds, if the audience loses somebody, you're gone. Think about the lectures you've attended in school. If the instructor loses you in the first 30 seconds, you're very unlikely to pay a lot of attention for the rest of the class. So a good presentation should be interesting. It should capture the attention of the audience. Now, even the most interesting presentation, if it's not informative, it's not going to do its job. So it needs to convey the information clearly, and it should get the information across to the user. And like I mentioned a minute ago, you should be careful not to convey too much information. So always be thinking about, when you're creating a presentation, is it interesting and is it informative? You want to be focusing on these two things. So one thing that I think is challenging when you conduct a presentation is this. So when you write a paper or submit a paper, you're presenting your work. You have a lot of time to go back and proofread things, to clean things up, to really think about how you organize things. But with presentations, you're presenting your work, but you're also presenting yourself. There's no redo on a mistake during a presentation. You just can't tell your audience, hey, forget this. Forget that I said that piece. So you're presenting you and you're presenting your work. So not only do you have to have the information in your presentation, but you have to convey it well. And conveying it well a lot of times boils down to practicing, to speaking slowly, to making sure you're speaking loud enough and clearly. Not to stereotype things, but a lot of times foreign students aren't loud enough for whatever reason. People need to be more of a loudmouth like I am and make sure everybody can actually hear what you're saying. So speak clearly, speak loudly, and speak confidently, and know what you're talking about during your presentations. So, first thing is, know your audience in your group. So how you conduct your presentation is going to vary depending on who your audience and what your purpose is. If you're presenting your work to a set of potential investors without much technical knowledge, you're not going to want to get too technical with your findings. Now, if you're presenting your work to a bunch of computer science and software engineering PhDs, you can probably feel like you can get pretty technical with your work. So, if you're presenting your work to a research group, your goal is very, very frequently to receive feedback. So, presenting your work to a research group could be presenting it at a conference, could be presenting your work to the class. A lot of times you're looking for feedback. And you're looking for that to guide some future potential work and to improve your work. Now, if you're actually presenting your work at a research presentation where you're presenting some of your main findings, you want to convey your idea. You want to show how the idea is interesting, why people should care about it. You can receive feedback. A secondary goal can be to receive feedback from your audience on your idea, but that should very much be a secondary goal. But if you're also presenting at a conference or even a poster, the main idea is to get people to read your paper. One idea I'll mention probably a couple times in this screencast is that your poster, or a lot of times your presentation, shouldn't be the end all to your work. The idea shouldn't be to present every piece of information about your work. The idea should be to provide an advertisement to get people more interested in your work. Now, getting people more interested Could be to get them to collaborate with you, maybe give you some information, maybe to read your full paper. So I would say a good poster or a good short research talk should be like an ad on TV for a car. When you see an advertisement on TV for a car or really any product, their goal is to get you to go out and find more information about that product. They're not giving you every piece of information about that car or the phone or whatever they're trying to sell. Their goal is to get you interested in that product. And so that a lot of times that's what you're doing in your poster presentation or short research presentation. Is to get people more interested in the product that you have or idea that you have. Don't forget the key points in your presentation. Keep focusing on what is the main message you want to convey. Are you trying to convey a couple of research questions or the findings for a couple of research questions? If you are, stick to those points. Far too frequently, I see people get too lost in the details. Maybe they're getting too technical. Maybe they're going over algorithms or something too much. Don't get too lost in the details. Stay kind of at a higher level for your work. Stick to the main points. If you have information that doesn't support a key idea, don't say it. That goes back to my first statement about silence being, important. Don't say too much. And like I just mentioned, the presentation is not intended to be all-encompassing because that's what the paper is really for. So presentations can follow different flows, but typically a good research presentation will follow these 5 general steps. So they'll follow motivation, background, contribution, results, and conclusion. So the motivation and problem statement, you should talk about what is the main reason why you're doing this work? Why should people care? Why is it a problem? Is it a real problem that people are looking to solve that you should be solving? A lot of times in the motivation and problem statement section, I'll use an attention getter to make sure that people are going to pay attention to the rest of the presentation and to really get them involved and interested in the work that I'm doing. For the background and related work section, you can talk a little bit about maybe what some of the previous people have done, maybe some of the previous works have done. You don't need to get too deep in the related works. Maybe mention 1 or 2 that are really close to what you're doing or really influential. But you definitely don't need to go through like 10 or 20 related works in your 10-minute presentation if you're doing a reasonably long research presentation. So usually I do leave the related work section a little bit short. The third step, you should focusing on what is your main contribution. What are you contributing to the body of knowledge? And how did you do that? So how did you do your work? What data did you collect? How did you analyze that data and so forth? For your results section, that's where you talk about what you found. You would answer some of your research questions. And conclusion, you can recap some of your main findings and maybe lay the groundwork for some future work. So generally, research presentations, technical presentations, will follow these 5 steps, but there are some small exceptions to these rules. But generally, they follow these same 5 steps. So the next couple things I want to talk about is really goes along the lines of the best ways to design slides and posters, and really any type of information that you're trying to convey. So I'm going to show you 2 slides, and you can think about which one looks better and which one is more interesting to you. Okay, so the first one is this. So in this slide, I'm talking about why I am really cool. So I am really cool because I'm smart. Everybody knows that. I'm funny. I'm probably the funniest person you've ever met. And I've done stuff. So this is an actual photo of me on the moon. I bet you didn't know I was at the moon, but I'm a pretty cool guy. Now let's take a look at the next slide. So you can read this if you want. But generally speaking, I'm guessing that if you were to take a look at the slides, this one would probably be a little bit better. Obviously, a lot of reasons why it's better. A couple off the top of my head are that it's short, it's to the point, it's easy to follow. So in here I have my main bullet points, main talking points off the slide, and here it's just a mess. Alright. This, I have a really cool visual aid that my fellow astronaut took of me when I was on the moon. It's, it catches people's attention. It conveys the message like, hey, I'm really cool. I'm awesome. I've been on the moon. So I have a good visual aid there. So in designing your slides, designing your posters or any kind of visual aids, be short and to the point. One thing I'll probably mention a bit as far as posters is you don't want to have complete sentences on your poster. At least, that's the rule. There are exceptions to it. But generally, you don't want to have full sentences on any of your posters. Usually less is more, and you just want to provide talking points off your posters to your slides. So if I was giving a presentation why it was cool, it would be much easier to talk off this slide versus this slide. And so I won't read through this all. I'm sure you will all freeze the video and so you can go through and read the slides. If nothing else, I'll have this will kind of incentivize people to go through and actually look at this course slides. So we talked about why it was better. Some general guidelines for your presentations are a rule of thumb is about 1 minute per slide. Now, this is a rule that does have a lot of exceptions, but when you're creating your presentations, your slide presentations, generally speaking, if you stick to about 1 minute per slide, you should be in good shape. Very frequently, what I find is that I may create a set of slides, and then I may say, geez, I don't know how I'm gonna talk for a whole 20 minutes. And then I'll practice, but when I actually give the presentation, I end up talking for like 40 minutes. So a lot of times we underestimate how long we can talk for, at least I do. But if you stick to about 1 minute per slide, you should be good. Don't present more information or materials than your audience can grasp. So if you're presenting to a group of non-technical folks, don't give them too many technical details. If you're giving a 5-minute presentation on some research work you've done, don't get too deep into an algorithm. Stick to a high level of things. And think about, if you're in the audience, what information would you want to see that was informative, what is interesting. And finally, use images wisely. A lot of times I see people use really too many or too few images, or maybe the images are too small. Or one pet peeve of mine in a serious research presentation is when people use too many funny images. So use images wisely. Use them to convey some basic sets of information. The same thing goes for tables and things like that. So in a research presentation, you don't need to worry about creating a table with like 800 rows in it or something like that. You can always give subsets of information, and really give the reader good reason to go through and check out your actual paper. Some more tips for technical presentation is to be detailed when necessary. So you can give pieces of information. Create drafts for your presentations and review them with your advisor. And when actually writing your final research presentation paper, write early, write often, don't wait till the end. And be in pretty regular contact with your advisor. So this goes for both thesis projects and capstone projects. Okay. So for actually giving your presentation, some general tips are to practice speaking. One thing I do quite often before I'm giving a good important presentation is to practice giving the presentation maybe in front of the mirror, maybe in front of some friends. But generally speaking, I will practice presentations that are very important 5 to 10 times, and I'll run through the whole presentations and be thinking about things that I would like to say. Maybe there's some interesting pieces of information that I want to make sure to say, so I'll practice it quite frequently. And one thing that you need a lot of guts to do is to record yourself speaking, record yourself giving the presentation. I say it takes a lot of guts because whenever I do it, I say, A, I sound that terrible, and B, I say, wow, I say a lot, and I stutter a lot, and things like that. But it is a good thing to do. It does improve your public speaking. but it does take more guts than I generally have. Some other tips, and I know I mentioned these before, but I'll just kind of recap them, is see if you can get your audience's attention early on. See if you can say something that's an attention getter. See if you can say something that's going to really make people want to pay attention to your work. And if you lose the audience's attention, generally it's very tough to get it back. Don't get too wordy. Don't give too much information. Stick to a higher level during your research presentation, and leave some space on slides. Don't overflow things. Don't get too wordy. If you look back at all the slides I've gone through, you'll see that other than this one, obviously, I try not to be too wordy. I just try to have some main bullet points that I can talk off of, so don't get too wordy with things. But as far as presentations and technical presentations, that's about it. I do have 2 other slides that I want to talk about. And this just goes along the lines of thesis and capstones. Is if you're thinking about doing a thesis, there are some formatting guidelines and a website you can use as far as publishing your thesis. If you do a thesis, you do create a bounded copy that goes to the library, and the department gets a copy. And if you're a capstone, if you're doing a capstone project, it should be written in IEEE or ACM format, including references. I always encourage folks to try LaTeX. So if you haven't already, you want to give LaTeX a shot. And at the end of your capstone, you submit a copy to your advisor and the department. And if you have any project material, you should submit that on a thumb drive or CD or DVD, and that will end up going to the department. And if you're doing a capstone, don't get too fixated on length. Same thing goes for thesis. It will be a lot of pages. Theses are generally between 50 and 100 pages. Capstones are, between 10 and 30 pages. I know that's a big variation, but try not to get too fixated on length. If you do good work, the length and the paper will fall into place. So that's it for me for today. So thanks everybody, and I guess you'll hear from me this week.